been attacked by your microphone. You can definitely hear the water fountains. That's quite nice. People will want to wee by the time we finish.
That's what I'm worried of. Like, I'm like, oh my god.
I hated this podcast because I needed the toilet.
You're on a semi-dry, windy, rainy, typical Scottish day.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we should probably explain where we are and
Indeed.
why we are in the summer house, basically.
Yeah, it's the safe bet. I suppose, yeah, so we're in East Renfrewshire, in Scotland, which is near Glasgow, and we're in the summer house. The summer house came to be because it's not necessarily heavy rainfall that we get. I mean, it is heavy rainfall, but it's not always heavy rainfall, but there's a lot of showers, and it just kind of got to the point where I was like, I could be in the potting shed perfectly fine, but there's also my family as well, and it meant that the best way was to just have a summer house that we could spend time in the garden, but just enjoy it, to sit back as well, because that's something I'm not very good at doing, and I'm trying to be better at, is just kind of sitting in the garden enjoying it, and that's hard to do if you're doing it either from your kitchen or bedroom window. So this is a much more like being inside the garden. It's a bit more
it's a really nice cozy space, and the people watching on YouTube will be able to see the lovely little cozy space, and we'll have to describe it to the listeners.
Yes, indeed.
But it is a really nice summer house, just looking over the garden, and you've got a really nice collection. Oh, I like that one over there, of succulents and cactuses and stuff like that, which we'll obviously love it in here through the glass. But it's nice, and we are hiding from the weather because it looks really black over there, actually, because it's on and off kind of been drizzling, hasn't it? And we were like, do we do it outside, even though we do want to show off your beautiful garden, and I will take some clips that we'll put in, but we thought, well, let's hide out in here, and then if it rains, you'll probably hear it, but at least we'll get the experience through screen. Frazzle ourselves with the equipment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, firstly, tell me a bit about you, because your story is quite an interesting one, I think, in terms of, I guess you tell the story how you want to tell it, but what you've done in your career, and then I suppose how you then got into gardening and where you've got to now with all of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it as concise. That I'm not very good at that. So originally I'm from Lincolnshire, a place called Grimsby, which is traditionally a fishing town, and I was just a huge Gene Kelly fan. Like, I just loved Gene Kelly. Singing in the Rain was the movie, like it is for so many, and so I really enjoyed tap dancing, and I was pretty good at it, and not many other lads in Grimsby danced. The lads. Not many of the lads danced in Grimsby at all. I enjoy football and things like that, but there was just that separation was there, and it was evident, and they were never afraid of making that known as well. So that wasn't easy, but I was told that I had some sort of talent, but there's no such thing as a tap school, so they encouraged me to audition for some of the dance schools, and that was mostly ballet schools, and I was successful in gaining a place at the Royal Ballet School, which is extremely difficult to get into, and it's one of the top 3 full-time ballet schools in the world. And that kind of training, to kind of give a bit of context, is that when you're there, so you have all your academics, and then you have several hours of dance on top of that per day, and then on top of that you have like some like quiet time, socializing time. Not that when you're between the ages of like 12 and 15, 16, you don't really have quiet time. But and then you've got homework and all that, so they're really long days, and it's really intense, and it's really like very intense training. So I went there. That was boarded for 5 years, like slap bang in the middle of Richmond Park. So it was a Henry VII hunting lodge, I want to say, and I was there for 5 years, so surrounded by that absolutely beautiful landscape. And nearby, I'd spend my weekends at the at Kew Gardens, which is just right on its doorstep, and there's the Isabella Plantations, which is in the park as well, and that's a really stunning woodland garden. And so I have really strong memories of being there, and and just like I said, the landscape was beautiful. Going on from there, I then went on to the upper school, which was in Covent Garden, so right next to the Royal Opera House, and I was there for 3 years. And after that, when I graduated, I got my first professional contract in a company in France. I was there for 2 years. So that's in the region of Alsace, which is a very like Franco-German place.
Area.
And it's like everything about it was just like spectacular. The architecture, the food, the people were fabulous. And it was a really great 2 years. But I got a call from a friend and he was like, look, there are some people leaving Scottish Ballet. So I was like, great, I'll send my stuff in. I got in a reply straight away, come and audition, hopped on the first flight I could, auditioned and got the job. So it was moving back to Scotland, which I'd never been to before. And
you'd never been to Scotland?
I had never been to Scotland before at that point, yeah. And so I was 12 years with the company there, and through that time I started as an artist, which is kind of the lower ranking, and then rose all the way up through the ranks to principal. And during that time as well, I was award nominated in Best Classical Performance for a Male Dancer from a performance I did at the Royal Opera House.
Wow.
And on top of that, I had a very blessed career where I worked with a lot of choreographers, and because of that it gave me a very extensive performance career and allowed me to perform in some the most incredible theatres across the world, the Kennedy Center in Washington, all over America, the Mariinsky in Hong Kong, in South Korea, and it's just been it's just a magical thing. And that's something that I took great joy in my career, is being a versatile dancer. I never tried to be incredible at one thing, because that's not what the company was and is about. It's about the versatility and putting on that performance. So that was great. To then bring gardening into it, so that's kind of a bit about that. And now I teach at the Dance School of Scotland. Aside from all my horticultural stuff, it is now raining quite a bit.
You can hear that, I think.
That's definitely coming down. But yeah, so gardening, I remember when I was a kid, in front of our greenhouse there was this kind of little patch, and the soil was like dust, it was the worst, but I used to try and make it as flat as possible. Now I tell myself it was just like Japanese gardening,
Yeah.
but it was trying to make it as flat as possible. But I enjoyed being in the garden. When I was over at my grandma on my father's side, they had this fabulous apple tree called the Peasgood Nonsuch, coincidentally, and I just remember being just loving playing underneath this apple tree and being in the garden and being outside, and so I'd kind of had a bit of experience in the garden. But fast forward to, I want to say 2016, and we were having a new performance of Swan Lake choreographed on the company, and it was intense, would be the most gentle way I could say. It was so intense, and it was incredible. I'd never been pushed so far in my life, creatively as a dancer, physically, mentally, but where was the recovery? I really struggled with the recovery mentally, and I found myself just outside, literally in autumn, planting bulbs, and it was calm, it was peaceful. I was being very thorough in the process, and I kind of walked away from it, job done. And my mind had kind of negotiated quite a few things, and I felt so much better from it, without really consciously sitting down and saying, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is I'm going to use some tools that's come from a psychotherapist or something like that. It was just time that I had, and it was on a kind of very subliminal level as well. It was just negotiated really gently, really calmly, and from there I kind of took a stronger interest in gardening. And we fast forward to now, where that's literally rain just flew in. Tom, you're getting the full
wet out there now.
You're getting the full Scottish experience. Is that that's a bit wild? And
all seasons,
all seasons. And now I'm on a new build garden, and and I'm really passionate about. One is my 8 meters by 6 garden, and then some other planting spaces that you've seen, some borders and whatnot, but also just trying to make it as diverse as possible, to enjoy different seating places, to be able to grow food, to be able to enjoy planting, so not being kind of specific to one thing, trying to get that kind of full value of what a garden can offer, and also looking at ways that could be done either on a budget or in a DIY friendly way, because gardening has become, I'd say, very expensive in many ways. Yeah. And the demand for us as a society to do more for even just for pollinators and for wildlife, for habitat, is huge, and somehow it's not as accessible as it was, say, even pre-lockdown, even post-lockdown, where gardening boomed. It's now got the price tag on top of it. Like, there has been an increase, and I understand that there are other variables in there that kind of contribute to that, but at the same time, all these things that we need to kind of that we need to do and that we want to do, but if anything, they're kind of getting further and further away in terms of how accessible it is. So and that's kind of how to where I am now, and through that, gardening has kind of offered me lots of like horticultural experiences as well, which I'm very keen to kind of take up, and whatever I do, it's like full research mode. I'm really passionate about that. I don't ever like to talk about anything that I'm not really like fully aware on. So I really like to kind of put in all the effort, and I'll do my full research so I feel confident, but also that I understand the situation and I can see both sides of it, so that I'm really passionate about.
Well, let's talk about your space, because so it's a new build house, fairly new, and looking at the houses around, it comes with the standard square garden, which in most cases comes with very little. Does it come with as standard, actually?
So that's a topic of conversation. As standard, the garden will come as just soil in the back, so no turf or anything like that. And a single path that will take you from the back door to the garden gate, right, in its most direct route.
Just a straight line.
Which ironically is very good, like, gardening principles, that if there's a job to do, straight path, not kind of a meandering. And then in terms of hedging, here they've offered, or at least they planted Portuguese laurel everywhere, which is fine. It has, it's lovely. I got rid of mine, right enough. I rehomed it, didn't get rid of it, I rehomed it. But that's what it comes with. So what they don't provide is any drainage or anything like that, or any hardscaping, just a single path. And nothing of any kind of value, really, to habitat.
Wow.
It's a blank canvas.
But it's not very much to start off people with, though, is it? And when you've got a new build house, you're moving in, it's all new, and then the last thing that you want to be doing is thinking about your garden. If you do want to be thinking about your garden, then you're looking out at a brown space,
it's
a brown
daunting.
Square,
it's really
and
daunting.
Thinking, where do I start?
It's daunting, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's where people go, right, okay, this is my budget, porcelain tile it or cover it in artificial grass, which is the most common thing in new build areas. And I just think, like, with new build homes, is that there are so many regulations that they now adhere to inside, and they are continually under assessment and improving, right? And yet nothing happens to the outdoors, which I find astonishing, because when we're in a time now where, even with cost of living of where, these are small spaces, but they're still big spaces. They are much bigger than like what maybe other people have, or balconies, yet there are some people out there who are growing food on balconies and things like that. And it just baffles me how not even on the bare minimum So if maybe they don't offer like the correct drainage, you know, for the site, it's that whatever's been removed, it's almost like it just gets dumped back in, you know. And there are other processes involved in that, but you know, it goes back in. And I've been digging through borders. In one of them along the front, I've got probably about like an odd telephone pole mast, you know, the big wooden ones. Really? About 2 meters of that I can't move, wow. And it's just there, set up shop there. But always bits of machinery, the silicon sealant tubes. Like I come across quite
just
a few of them.
Wow, I know they're often full of rubble, but
I found a saw as well, which is like really dangerous as well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of disappointing. And I know that someone can walk away from that and say, well, that may be down to those who are working on site and therefore site management. But they do work for a company, and it is up to that company to regulate it. So without getting kind of like too
ultimately people are getting handed a home with a garden that is in that state, regardless of how it got there, and that's not gonna create great garden spaces for the future, is it? Or inspire people to have them, or get people started on that. And as I think as a country, as a nation, you know, that's if we want to be encouraging people to be gardening more for all the benefits that we know that gardening has, you know, whether it's just people's mental well-being or having a space to enjoy or whatever, we're not helping and facilitating that by giving them a brown blob.
Because ultimately as well, if they're going to put in drainage, they're going to have to excavate again when it's already been excavated in order for them to kind of do the house's foundations and things, and then they kind of build back up. And I'm like, it's already you could have done that the even if it was like perforated piping in kind of like a herringbone formation or something like that. Many gardens now are on a gradient as well, so it has a natural drainage away, because then you get a lot of flash flooding down in the kind of older areas in villages and things like that. And so it could be done there and then easy, but it doesn't. It all gets plonked back in, and then thousands of pounds later you've got a company coming in to dig it all back up and then put it in, and then kind of go on from there. And at that point, for many, the easiest thing is to just go, right, okay, just slab it.
Well, when you've only got so much budget, especially at first, then that's where you're probably going to start, isn't it? Just to give you a usable space. But I've never really thought about the fact that actually it could come with all that work done, and that would cost them hardly anything at the time, because they're doing it anyway, like you say. And then you come with some kind of basic of a garden, and you come with some kind of, I think they should come with some kind of basic borders, or, you know, some kind of lawn at least, or, you know, not just a brown square.
Yeah, well, when and for those listening who in a new build, it's a process. You know, you pick this and you pick that, and this costs this much, this comes with this, and you can upgrade it, and then none of that for the garden. But there should be one. I just think
you can't even just pick and say, I want to have a lawn, I want to have a patio. You don't even get that option.
Precisely. So I definitely believe that it should come with drainage. Every time it should always come with drainage, as part of the price of the house. And then after that, then having an option of lawn and hardscaping and any bordering. I know that is to a home builder, that is additional time, when actually they just want to go, right, boom, finished,
they want to move on and sell them on. But
equally, you can say that about all the plumbers that I've got come in to kind of do the last minute things, the electricians that are doing maybe the fittings and all that. It's a similar thing, just externally. And the garden is another room, multiple rooms of
it's
the house.
It's added value, ultimately, isn't it, to the end product. And load of work for garden designers and landscapers and stuff that could keep hundreds of people in a job, if not thousands, by doing that. And everyone gets some kind of start.
Yeah,
really.
And I think if borders were there, and most commonly on new builds, it's always raised. They tend to be kind of like sleepers piled on top. Then if that was there, I think people would be more inspired to put something in there. And it doesn't need to always be an incredibly educated choice. And I know there's right plan, right place, and I feel like that if someone's interested in gardening, that's when that becomes really appropriate. But a lot of people who aren't, they'll just see something that's price appropriate, and mostly annuals like bedding plants, and they'll kind of shove them in. And then they kind of go, oh, everything died.
Yeah.
And you know, like, obviously if it's an annual, yes, it has died. But if they put perennials in, it's not survived. And then they kind of go, oh, and they get annoyed, and then they leave it because they're like, no, because it's a waste of money.
It's putting people off gardening.
Yeah, because I'm planting, I've spent this money, and perennials are mostly getting more expensive. And then they die, and they go, oh, well, I'm not seeing that back again. And then they leave it. So then that's where I'd say like places like the Instagram community come in, you know, because there is so much out there that can be accessed that doesn't come in the form of books if people aren't interested in buying books. Maybe later on down the line, when they've kind of invested a bit of time, they'll be like, you know, I'm going to get a book, or this person I like in particular, and they've written a book, boom. And so starts the trend of what could be like a really like gorgeous future for somebody in the garden, you know. And I just think there are so many pathways for gardening. It doesn't have to be this, that the thing that you can see on TV or in magazines, when you see these like.
The thing is, the TV stuff and the magazine stuff is often really unobtainable, or on a very grand scale, and even if they're giving ideas of what you can do, it somehow seems unrelatable, unachievable. Whereas actually the Instagram gardening community are real people in real houses. You get to see all different types, because you can follow those amazing, beautiful gardens, of which there are, and some amazing accounts in that space. But there are also amazing accounts with a small garden, a balcony garden. You know, there's something, you will be able to find someone who has a spot like you, and follow them along and what they do and their tips and stuff like that. And that's what you're doing, isn't it, in the new build space, basically?
Yeah, I hope so. I do try where possible, where I've got like a new idea, try my hardest to kind of like give a brief outline of how I did it. And then when people kind of DM me or ask me questions, that, you know, I'll always reply to the best I can. And anything like that, I'll always kind of share it. And I am really passionate about that, because again, it goes along the same premise of, you don't have to do all these things. You don't have to, because really, as long as we're giving that message out, people are only going to kind of walk further back and go, oh no thank you, because it's overwhelming. And they're thinking money, and they're thinking time, and they might be thinking children, and how does this work? You know, how do I maintain that? What if it dies? You know, all these crazy things. And my premise is like, how about pick one, and focus on that to the management level of that you're interested in.
Exactly. You can pick and choose things that you've seen you do, and have a go at some of them, one of them. And I think that's also the great thing about Instagram, because we can all be quite honest about our fails and things that didn't work out as well, which means that people who are just starting out and stuff like that can go, okay, you don't have to know everything, it's not always perfect, it's not always like you do this and then that works out, like even these people who kind of know what they're doing, it doesn't always work out and things don't go right, so I'll just give it a go.
And equally, all the professional gardeners out there that garden the estates are just the most like generous people with their time and information, and you can ask them questions on their Instagrams and things like that, and there's a high percentage that they'll respond and give you good advice back, which in other areas of anything really, in other industries, it's actually quite rarely the case. You know, people aren't so like
well,
giving
a
back.
lot of the time you message an influencer or you know, someone on Instagram, and you don't get a response, and you almost don't expect a response. Whereas actually, you're right, the gardening community, it's very rare that you don't get a response.
100%.
Because I think we're all in it for that reason as well, is that we want to share stuff, we want to help people, and the gardening community especially is really about bringing each other up and supporting each other, and there's never any kind of competition or rivalry or this is the way you should do something. Everyone has different ways of doing stuff, we've all learnt different things, and we share that with each other, and we share that with everyone who watches. And I think we, if anything, encourage DMs, which sometimes is difficult to manage, but I know that I always want to make sure that I do get back to them, even if it takes me a few days, because I know that there are people there who are asking questions, they need some help or want some advice
100%.
or want just a chat. But I think the garden community is great for that.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. And what I've started to notice as well is, obviously it's time spent in what is a new community here, and it's in its very early stages. But neighbours are starting to kind of ask me questions and say, what about this, what about that? Which is brilliant, because they are thinking about what is good for this site, because we do get heavy wind or at a higher altitude and things like that. So it is really important for people to feel comfortable enough to ask questions, and I do think that the garden community does do that. Yeah,
I should also say it's sunny now and blue sky.
It's calmed down a little bit.
We need to go and sunbathe now while we've got the chance.
It's definitely it's definitely an intimate space.
So let's talk about your garden. We need to describe it for the listeners. First and foremost, and the people on YouTube will see a few more visuals. But talk us through the space and what you've done with it, taking it from that blank space to what it looks like now, and why you've done what you've done and what you've done with it.
Okay, perfect. I'll try and go chronologically as well. I think that might help. So one of the first things that we did was to get drainage put in. So the whole thing was excavated. We had drainage installed, and we're on a gradient going down to the bottom corner. So what they did is that the space is 8 meters by 6, the rear garden, and I had a patio installed that's right up to the house, and that's because I wanted my daughter to be able to go straight out the back doors onto a hard surface first, and then an area that was originally grass and a kind of curvy path with either side a border. And then at the back was originally bark, nothing, because I wanted a kind of separate area. And this is me trying to facilitate 100 ideas into one. But I think that's what makes a garden personal.
Yeah.
So we started off with that hardscaping there. So they did the drainage, and then we had that hardscaping patio and a curving path. And then down in the very far corner in front of the garden gate, there is 2 paving slabs. Below that is a lot of rubble, so acting as a sump, so like a kind of like underground reservoir, where it allows the water to drain down to. So the piping that's in the ground runs down to there as well, and that it's never overflowed, ever. It's done its job. It goes and then it naturally drains away, and we're on a kind of a higher altitude within the development itself, so we're on a micro level. And so that was the hardscaping part of it. The next thing to go in was my potting shed, because that's what I really wanted. I wanted a potting shed. It was I couldn't imagine any sort of garden without one. And on a space that was limited, this particular potting shed that has windows on 3 sides,
it's really nice,
offered me some growing space and some cover from the weather and some storage. So what I did is that I was cautious of putting another hardscape down. So what I've done is I've used these eco grids, which are recycled plastics, and they click together, and they're 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, and you fill it with gravel, so it's permeable as well. So you're never going to get any water sat. It's always draining down. And one of the best things about it is that in time to come, if the potting shed's rotted down or people don't like it or whatever, that can then all just come out, and then you're back to kind of aggregate or whatever's underneath. So that whole area was filled. The grids were filled with like a Cotswold stone, and then we've got the potting shed on top of that. Great. To divide this kind of area at the back with the path, I did a kind of like a post and rail fencing, which I was really keen on. Originally I wanted I can't remember the name of it. It's lost on my mind, but there's a different kind of like fencing, but it's just really uncommon here. And this was just easily accessible, and I really liked the idea. Was kind of born from some summer holidays in Yorkshire Dales. Like, absolutely loved all the fencing that they had. I just think it's it's that kind of division of where you're going through to a next space.
Yeah.
So I don't have a gate on it, it's just open. And then what I have is, there's a little bit of wire right next to the gate, and on it has, I have a little bit more in the shed, but it's wool from the sheep, from the field, from where my wife and I got married.
Wow, that's
And
nice.
so like, and I have we went one day and I kind of like pulled off all the fence. Sorry, farmer. And then each summer I put a little bit of it on there, as just a little nod to to like those little details, in the Dales. And I remember the Chelsea Garden, the Welcome to Yorkshire, they kind of had that detail in there, so I was kind of semi-inspired from that, semi-inspired from my holidays, and kind of have that in the garden, so it's a kind of,
and it makes it personal to
you really again. Personal. So that was a little sidetrack. So in this kind of back garden, so beyond the fence where I've got the potting shed and the little bit of wool, I've got 3 very small 80 centimeters by something raised beds. At the moment we have tomatoes, crocchini and Brad's Atomic, grape, and then in the other one we've got sweet peppers, called something and the other one is currently has got dahlias in that I thought I'd gone, that just weren't doing anything, and then decided that the show must go on, and they decided and they made a late show, so I'm just leaving them be, and then I'll cut them back, dry them out.
Were just really late this year. What I really like is that you've gone out of the garden though as well. So you've got your square that you were allocated, but then you've also got the kind of stripe, if you like, down the side of the house to help people imagine. And you've owned that space as well. It's not just the extra few feet that you got behind the fence. It is a full border. It's a space that wraps around the garden and the house. You've made that, I mean, currently full of wildflowers on one part. You've got amazing, flowers further down. It's like this gorgeous. You've even added in a little path.
So recent project was I wanted more growing space, so I've changed adapted our driveway. It's a double driveway, but the kind of it's in length, so it's long. So I've added 3 cold frames to the back, which do get really hot actually, so they can be used for growing space. It's got storage underneath. Yada yada yada.
I've been following avidly on Instagram as you've built that one and gone through
Thank you.
One.
It's I'm really pleased with that one, because it's a space that anyone can do, and cold frames can be super pricey. These ones always look in the sale. Top tip, keep looking in the sale.
Find.
Google, I paid like £30-something each for them, which getting 3 of them was my original budget for one. Good times. And then we walk around, and basically it kind of goes straight onto the path. My garden's on the side of my house, so there's no pathway for my daughter to go from where the front door is round to the driveway, which would then go through to the back garden. So I made a little path on one side of it. Up against the fence, I planted in autumn last year hawthorn bare root. Hawthorn was the most common species that was on the plot before it was turned into a new build development, so it only felt right to kind of put that back in. So we had 40 bare roots there, and I'll maintain that in time to come, about just north of 2 meters, so it sits just above the fence and offers a kind of bit of privacy from neighbours' windows as well, which I think would be really nice. So that's a patience game. On the other side, we've got a threefold. So we start the year with tulips, and that's Pretty Princess, and that's planted en masse, and nice. just the one variety, and that is a nod to kind of Dutch growers and kind of those really picturesque things you see where they have all those strips. After that, we have the Allium Christophii, which
and they were huge as well. I mean, I've seen
huge,
some big ones, but yours came up really cute. I've seen the dried heads in the shed, and they were great.
We're really happy with them, and they, and as they started to die away, they kind of had this like glow about them, which I love about the alliums. And now it's a wildflower, and that seed is specific to clay mix for the soil there, because that's not been improved at all. And I just thought it was only right to not try and force growth, but to kind of put put the right thing in place. So that was a clay specific mix, and they've done well. The poppies are going brilliantly. It was sown a little bit late because like we just had awful weather and it was too wet. But it's done well. So I'm confident for next year. There's a little patch of grass, doesn't belong to me, but I have planted some. I don't know what it is. I think the small daffodils, but it's similar. It's about the same height as tete-a-tete, and they come back, and it is just picturesque early in the year. So I might plant some more.
Nobody telling you.
No one telling one.
And we've talked about the weather.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Scotland and the climate and how you find it for gardening.
Yeah. So it's difficult gardening. I think, well, like anywhere, you have
pros and cons.
Yeah, you have pros and cons. We happen to be on quite a windy aspect, and I recently wrote about this, where when it's windy, the great communal links, advertisement, it just travels, and there's nothing that will block that out.
You can probably hear in the background.
Yeah, you can probably hear it for sure. if not from the
if not the water
the water feature where everyone's running off to the toilet. You can only layer the sound. Hence the water feature, needing those more trees in the area to kind of hear that breeze, so that the sound is layered. Otherwise, it's singular, and all you hear is the road, and some days it's so frustrating, but when it's windy, that is the case, as it is in a lot of places, to be honest. That's not exactly specific to Scotland, but with Scotland, what I will say is, to kind of stay on point, it's the all weathers in one day,
as we've experienced,
and here you are, and you've experienced it. It was sun, and then we had rain, and then we had wind, and that was like it was
all in the space of this half an hour.
And that was like low key, it wasn't crazy. Yeah. There can be days where I'm looking out in the garden and I'm like, oh, like I'm just tense, the breath is held a little bit. I'm like, please. So even things like, I know like the zippy greenhouses don't normally do well in the wind anywhere. But here, I feel like,
you've got them well strapped down.
Oh, God, Dorothy. She's like Wizard of Oz should be gone. So, yeah, they're well strapped in. And that'll be a project for next year, actually. I have something else that I've got in mind for that, like a more permanent structure.
Do you find that the season is shorter?
Yeah, so this is not shorter, later, considerably. Right. So,
but it does come... So you don't... So you get winter later, then, in effect. Obviously, I know you don't. Seasons don't work like that, but it's almost what I mean. It's not shortening, it's just later.
Yeah, later. It's up to 4 to 6 weeks, actually. I was having this conversation recently with a lady called Diana Yates, and she presents on Beech Grove and has a fabulous book, Growing at Greenfields. And we were saying it's just amazing how it is a month to 6 weeks, like where everyone's got their tulips coming through. I'm still waiting for daffs to do their thing, like the later flowering daffs. And then we get the tulips are coming through in like May sometimes,
Well, I was talking to someone the other day actually about this, and on Instagram, the great thing with the gardening community is that you almost see this wave come up the country from the the people who are in the south of the country, and that you're always envious of them. Especially you must be, because you're still wrapped in a blanket. But they have their tulips start to come out, like you say, and then we're like, haven't even got a daffodil yet, or a snowdrop, never mind a tulip. And then it kind of waves up the country. But then, I mean, that's another question that I'll come back to in a minute, because it kind of stops halfway. Yeah. But yeah, so you're later then.
Yeah, later.
You're watching everyone thinking,
so what it really means is that, so it arrives and then everything kind of follows on. When I see everyone else's gardens kind of like dying back and getting that kind of that structural frame that forms the frosts of winter, fab. We're still going. And I'm like, I've still got photos and all these like wonderful things, and I can still dry flower heads and press with my daughter and all these things. And then you enter autumn, which is by far one of my most favourite season, I think.
Me too.
One, in the garden, but also just for everything autumnal, like the whole, the the woolly jumpers, the hot drinks, the colours, the oranges. That's a different story altogether. And then we hit winter, and then winter to first flower is long, and it can be really sad.
Yeah,
and I mean that in its most truest form, like emotionally. It's, and I'll get up and go to work in the pitch black and come back in the pitch black, which won't be uncommon to anyone up and down the country. But the sight of flowers, like this first daffodils, is just glory. And like weeks will go by where I'm seeing it through a screen or on a TV show, and I'm like, come on. And then it arrives, and then brilliant, that gives life. But it's a long stretch, Christmas, up until those first bulbs start to flower. And I don't do any forcing of bulbs or anything like that.
No.
I wait it out. But that is tough, and I'd say that's what I notice the most. That's the hardest thing. But we do get it later. So going through till September, you can get really good. You can still get another set of flowering coming through. Like we have in front of us, that's all still, that's a second go really, so that's brilliant.
And that wave that we talked about coming up the country does kind of stop, I think, in a way. And is there much of a gardening community up here? Because I mean, looking at it from an outsider on the other side of the wall, is that there's not really any shows up here. They don't bring those up here for you guys. I don't see so much of a gardening. But don't get me wrong, there are gardeners on here, and you are one of them. But I don't see them as prolifically as you do down south. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, spot on. There are gardeners that are on Instagram 100%, but it's about ratio. The ratios are completely not the same. And there are some fab ones nearby, just to kind of, I've mentioned Diana Yates already, and she does a hell of a lot. And Lizzie Schofield, that's way up north, and she's kind of like she won, is it a Gardener's World Garden of the Year and People's Choice. And Helen Cross, Grow, Cook, Inspire, and they fabulous women, and advocate for gardening, for growing, for mental health, for getting kids involved, for all those incredible things. But from the top of my head, they're the three that I'm naming. Yeah. And I'm struggling to find more. And if there is a profile, it's kind of secretive. I don't really know the person behind the profile.
It's about the exposure of these people, isn't it? Because they do exist, and representation and letting us hear and see more of those people, and probably then encouraging others in this area to do the same.
So there are people with I think there are a lot of gardens out there, a lot of gardeners, a lot of brilliant gardens, but just they're not sharing it, I suppose, would be the only kind of the most black and white way I can put it. There are a fair few interior ones. You get a lot of interior, paneling and the what kind of tones, and a lot of seasonal things as well, of seasonal decor and holiday decor and things like that. But the gardening, there just seems to be a huge gap, and it needs filling.
And I'm right in saying that there aren't any shows up here.
There is definitely. I'm gonna get told off because I'm going to pronounce this wrong, so I'm going to say that now. But I think it's Sconce Palace Fair.
Okay.
It's obviously the first word that I'm not sure if it's right, and they did have one this last year. I'm not sure if it's been done previous years, but they had one this last year. The scale was some meters by some meters square, and then it's kind of like one of those ones. If it is the first year, or regardless, actually, it's a great to have it.
Yeah.
And that is a gardening fair, which I think is wonderful, and there are lots of gardeners that go there. But equally, it's just not on the same scale.
You don't
and
have
I don't
the
know.
RHS shows. You don't have the Gardeners World Lives.
Yeah, is it the interest? Is it the investment? You know, you can probably put you can attribute a lot of things behind those reasons, maybe. But I think if we're going to drive forward communities to be growing more in the space that they are in, whether that's from a window box to acres, then shows like that are not only brilliant for other companies to kind of put their name out there, but for people to start talking and to maybe listen to experienced gardeners.
When we talk about that gap in the representation, that is the space where all of us guys are going to all the shows. We meet each other, we see people talk on a stage, we follow them, and that gardening community is really strongest at the shows, and we all talk about that we it feels really great when we all can meet each other and stuff. But you're almost missing that, and those gardeners that you named and talked about, that would be their space to be represented, and for 100%. Everyone to meet them and hear more about them. So, and I guess that would start that whole community and people getting into it and joining Instagram themselves and sharing their own garden, or just having a go at something and almost create that community.
It's spot on with that community is the thing, is that kind of sense of being involved in the community. And I just think that there is a gap, 100%, and I do think it's not to say that there isn't a community there. I think that would be a huge disrespect to all those people who are trying so hard, and myself included, but the ratios are not there, and there are people out there that I think who could even maybe want to do more, but are maybe nervous of doing so. And places like shows, like you said, are a place to establish that community, and I do think that things change when you meet somebody face to face or engage with a company face to face and all that. But there are other issues around that with accessibility as well. I think as far as like the gardens go, there needs to always be a variety in terms of its price structure. It can't always be that golden ticket, that Charlie got. There needs to be all that comes, say, with Chelsea, and how difficult it is to get a ticket and the pricing that comes with that. But there needs to be a similar thing that is more accessible to other people, not on that price packet, but also not on a quality that saves that price packet. There needs to be, and there are a lot of people out there who will talk about what their experiences are. So also I'm a really firm believer of that it's not just about arriving with a show. It's
with a show that costs £150 a ticket.
It's how do we make this accessible to anyone as well? That these shows go in a place, one place. People have got to travel. People have got to get there. Some people maybe not drive, so they're thinking about trains, etc. And then on the day, it's paying for food and things. And what is a price of a ticket is suddenly a bigger picture. And if they're travelling further afield, they might have to stay somewhere overnight. So it has a real roll-on of all these things. So I think there should be big, that we should be conscious towards that. And that's across all garden shows, to be honest. But in Scotland, there is. I'd love to see an increase over the next years. One, in its community. And two, in like gardening events and things like that. I just think get them out there. And I understand that maybe a lot of places need to have instant like a profit margin that's that's instant. They don't want to go in at a loss or anything like that. But I think for as long as we're afraid of that, then I feel like it's just going to back further and further away to a dark corner. And that's a really scary thing, because the gardens, and I'm going to say green spaces, I should say green spaces, is just so vital. They're one of the most versatile things that we have. And again, that is from herbs on a window box all the way through to people who have got woodlands and things like that. There's so much there.
So what's next then for Andy?
Oof, big question. What I'm trying to be better at is that I'm trying to be better at saying yes where appropriate. Yeah. Is I've always been very cautious, like working in for the years I spent in the dance industry. I was, you're forever doing kind of what you're told.
Yeah.
And not much happens outside, or at least, in my experience, like the creative control was put on you. And so I'm kind of used to doing that. And speaking through movement and with my body, that was my experience. But I really enjoy talking about gardening, things like that. And that's been a really big change for me, is putting things down into words, where I've spent a lifetime kind of expressing it through motion. Yeah. But also kind of looking at opportunities that are coming my way and not saying no to them, because I may be nervous of not experiencing them before. When on stage, I'd take that risk. I would have taken that risk in a heartbeat. But here, so I'm trying to like apply the same thing. So that being said, I want to continue challenging what can be achieved in a new build garden, really, but not to kind of get so specific that is that Andy Peasgood, that new build gardens. It's about projects that can be done in any garden for a gardener who's maybe new or wants to try something new, has got a space but doesn't know what to do with it. All those kind of areas of manageable gardening, and from there I feel like it kind of takes care for the person themselves, like they kind of get on top of it. They'll go in a direction that they want to go in, but offering out those things in the first and foremost. So that's on the kind of like what I'm doing in my garden. I do a lot of work with Caledonian Horticulture. They've informed me that I'm a brand ambassador, which so that's.
But I think that all really helps with all that sort of stuff that we talked about, and that gap. And people in this area, it's a very don't shoot me down, people, but it's a very like this area brand. It's a very northern brand. We don't really hear about it down south. And I think you're by doing that, you're featuring on their pages, on their videos, and stuff like that. You are helping to show what you can do in your spaces and with the sort of products that they have and stuff like that, and really again just bridging that gap a little bit.
I really like them because sustainability is at the heart of what they do completely, and that's why I'm happy to work with them. If they weren't, then I wouldn't be. Because of all the ethical reasons, and what I stand for. So I think it's a really nice partnership, and we're always challenging ourselves to what things that we can do to help. And so I do work with them. I also have a column with Scotland Grows, which is Scotland's. It's digital, completely online, so no paper or anything. And it's Scotland's gardening magazine, and it's advice for Scottish gardeners, so regional gardening, which again, as you've heard already, I'm quite passionate about. So it's all advice for Scottish gardeners and things that do well in Scotland, even talking about seasonal growing for food and what's appropriate to the season and things like that, with it being a later season, and all that. So it's all kind of interconnected. So I enjoy writing when I can for them, and just kind of seeing what kind of comes my way. But I am keen to do more. So down the line, I'm looking at doing a garden design course, where I'd aim to offer garden design plans that they can then pass on to their landscapers essentially. But then it's finding a plan. The whole premise is finding a plan where if they don't want to have a high maintenance garden, that we can provide that, but it doesn't mean we have to cover the whole garden in plastic. We can do something that is low maintenance, and then I can help with that and show them how they can maintain it, even if it's like a twice a year prune or something like that. But having something, trying to encourage people to even have like the smallest incy bit of horticultural value in their garden. And then there might be
astroturf.
And there might be people that who are like, oh, we want loads, give us beds, and borders, and I'll be like, great. So then when we'll talk about softscaping, it's that'll then be a separate conversation. So that's where I am really interested in going in another direction of having that. And then, then I feel like I'm also kind of like feeding my like kind of green fingers, but at the same time helping out in the whole new build thing, and I call it thing because it still very much feels like a thing. It's like we've not got precedent set yet. It's just meh. It's there. And it's like a conversation that people are kind of maybe half bothered if they want to have it, but if not, they're happy to just go, put the tiles down.
Well, you're going to be there
down.
Pushing on that door.
I'll be there
as it's ready
knocking
to be
away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's careful. It's like, I don't want to preach, and we've spoken about this before. I really don't want to preach. It makes people back away. I'm keen to offer manageable solutions for people, and I think that is key because they're gardening for them. They're not gardening for what my intentions are. It's their process, so it should only ever be their process. And if I can help in some way, brilliant.
So I think we're safe to brave it outside.
Oh, definitely.
And I could chat to you for hours, but the listeners probably won't appreciate that.
No, sorry.
So we'll continue our conversation later. But for now, thank you very much for joining. And everyone, if you don't already, obviously follow Andy on Instagram for more tips and ideas and to see what you're up to next.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll speak to you soon.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.